Hello and welcome everyone to our Laserfiche training webinar for Laserfiche Forms titled Your Love of Languages Found in Laserfiche Forms. My name is Kyle Niebel from Cities Digital. I'm a technical trainer here and I'm happy to present this webinar here today. This is exciting. We're going to take a look at some really neat things. Go ahead and we'll take a look at a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any help, go ahead and post questions in the questions box or in the chat window, and we'll be happy to answer your questions or help you out. I do have an assistant offline watching who will help you out there. So as you go through this, if you have any questions of the topic at hand, or want to learn more, we can get you some info. Go ahead and feel free to take screenshots or notes. Again, ask questions as we go through this. And this will have a survey at the end of the webinar. We want to see how we're doing, and we appreciate your feedback. It always helps us improve our topics and our presentations. And this will be recorded. In a couple of days, it will be available on our CDI YouTube channel so that you and anybody else who's interested can learn a bit more about this topic, which is really kind of an exciting one. So who's our target audience? This is a forms process and some neat tricks regarding Laserfiche Forms. So we're going to probably assume that you're a Laserfiche administrator or IT staff who supports Laserfiche. You might be a subject matter expert in Laserfiche products or departmental use of Laserfiche. You might be just somebody curious about Laserfiche Forms, and one would expect to have basic to intermediate level forms experience. This gets into some potentially advanced topics, but I am going to try and walk you through what is going on here so that you understand the methodology that Laserfiche has used to implement some of this language capability in Laserfiche Forms. So our topic today is how do we build language translations into Laserfiche Forms? In other words, how do we go from English to another language? And I'll show you how you do that here today. We've got a couple of screenshots. On the left is a English, and then having chosen a particular additional language, those fields, forms, tabs, and all the components in the form will be translated to a different language. And we'll show you how we get to there today. There's an easy way to do this. In the classic designer, it used to be that you could just implement with just a few pieces a language translator powered by Google. In fact, both of these translation methods do use Google Translate, except in slightly different methods. One is very simple and the other is a bit more complex, but I hope to explain in this session how we can get our advanced setup as well. There's also a couple reasons why we would want to use two different ways of implementing Translate in our forms, right, using Google Translate. So if you have Laserfiche Forms 11, but maybe update 2 or 3, or if you even have updated, but you still have older Laserfiche Forms with the old form design methodology rather than the newer one available from update 3 onward of version 11, with a modern designer, then we might need to do the translation methodology differently. So that's the difference. If you have the newer version 11 update 3 or onward, we're up to update 5 at the moment though, you might see when creating a new form, you have a choice. Back in the day, there was no choice. It just used this, what they now refer to as the classic form designer. The modern form designer has drag and drop capability where you can align fields several across on one line right on screen without having to do any special tricks. The classic designer, it took a lot more to do alignment of fields on one line, for example, and it just had simpler interfaces and it used any JavaScript you might throw at it. Whereas the modern form designer, it uses JavaScript, but only in the sandbox where it uses Laserfiche form calls alone, not the entire world of JavaScript. So we have to account for that when implementing translations in JavaScript. We're going to take a look at that. Now, where does this happen in the real world? Quite often we find it in lots of different government and pseudo-government environments like schools and school districts. We have student registration forms and we have to have multiple languages. ESL for students, any ESL classes or ESL sign-up forms. Well, that's pretty obvious. This would be a great implementation when we have translation in there. Financial agreements, laptop loaner forms, and any city or county government services forms where we do have to provide language capability. And the great thing about this technique that we're going to learn about today is that you can use any language that Google Translate supports. Whereas Laserfiche, and this is for forms, whereas Laserfiche in some of the other applications like the client side only supports about 8 different languages, even if your Windows machine is localized or your region settings are set for one of these, it would work, but that's all it supports as far as out of the box in Laserfiche applications, not forms. This is what we're going to look at here today in forms. Will allow us to use quite a few more than just 8 languages. Laserfiche applications like the server and the web client or Windows client are going to be able to implement language based on your region settings in the Windows machine itself for only these 8 listed, like English, Arabic, Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Chinese, and Thai. All right, so here's a screenshot in the settings. You might find that the regional settings would be switched up to be something else. In most of our cases here in America, it's probably set for English, but it depends. So that's the slight difference. In a form, you can have all kinds of neat implementations. So in our demonstration today, we're going to take a look at a few things. And there is in cloud or on-premise in your business processes system, you are going to want to use the following business process. It is titled, when you go search for it, it's a template pre-built, and the newer versions of the Laserfiche Forms 11 will have this. For example, update 4 and 5, I believe, have this. Update 3 might not have this business process. So every time, by the way, if you didn't know this, every time you update your Laserfiche Forms system, the templates get updated as well. So you have more design templates to use, and this one is one of them. It's a fantastic tool, and we're going to step through it. Now, this will provide us some good examples, but what if you're starting from scratch? Well, you're always going to be using some tools. You're going to always have a field. In the basic setup that we're going to look at, you'll have a custom HTML field and some JavaScript. That's what we use in the classic form design to get a translation capability. If you take that same classic form, but then update it to the modern form design, you're going to basically break that simple translate, and you'll have to go step into what we're going to look at today, which is how we implement translations in the modern form designer. You could start from scratch, but you still need to do these techniques in the modern form designer that we'll learn here today. All right. Now, optionally, if you want to get some easy translations and you want to have and use a Google Cloud API account number and use the Google Cloud API, you can do that. It's not required. It's just a bit more steps manually to do the changes, but it's fairly straightforward, and I'll explain here today how we do that. So if you don't have a Cloud API, you won't lose much in that implementation step. It's a lot easier. So we'll go through that here today. So we're going to take a look at how we implement translations in Laserfiche Forms here right now. All right. So I have launched my Laserfiche Forms, and I'm using on-premise. But on the Laserfiche Cloud, it's the same thing. If you go to the business processes section, you will find that there's a design mode, and you can choose to launch and find any business process. In your search, you're going to look for JavaScript form translation with optional Google Cloud Translation API integration. Mouthful, but that is what you're going to look for. I've actually uploaded one and called it Google Translate with samples, only for purposes here for today. But normally what you'll use is the process as we see listed here. All right, so this is one of those files that you would find in the solution template. In fact, if you click on the solution template, it's a fairly popular one, and it actually pops up as one of the newest ones. They say it's a complexity level 1, meaning there's not too much to it, and it has some built-in techniques and examples in here. So we're going to use this as our standard item, which is great. Okay, so that's where it comes from. You can even search in it for just search the word translate and or translation, and you'll be able to find that in the list. Go ahead and load it into your system, and you'll be good to go. And if you're in the Cloud Designer, it's here as well. Anytime you do use Laserfiche to upload or begin building from a template, you do get this dialog box, and it describes what's going on. It's got some download files, and in fact, in this particular process, this download files, it has documentation as to how to go about doing this whole method that we're going to try and demonstrate here today. I might miss a few things, but if you want, you can use this document to fill in the details that might be missing or weren't quite clear, but this is a great tool to use to guide you in building the solution that you might use. Once you've done that and you've read that, go ahead and import the process, which at that point will then bring you into the design mode for that particular process. So I'm going to click onto what you would normally be dropped into in the design mode. And you'll get dropped into your process diagram, and you'll see, at least with that template, you'll see 2 forms. I actually have added a third, but you'll have this modern translations and no translations option. In fact, if we click on the no translations form, let's take a look at how that looks out of the box. And it comes with a default form, a new employee information form. I've customized it with our theming, which is kind of fun. You can always click that little theme paintbrush icon in the top right corner and add your own logos, change the colors and fonts of the form itself. We can see here that this form has a few tabs. It's got some language selectors, and this all comes out of the box as part of this defined item. The logos and things like that are added on separately that I added here, but this is an example form that we get, and we can tell that it's using the modern designer because on the left-hand side, we have the name of the form called No Translations, and then we have these layout, field rules, lookup rules, custom messages vertically. Whereas the classic mode does not display the information here on the left-hand side. I'll click briefly here on the classic design and what that looks like. Same form layout, actually slightly different form layout, but notice all those field rules, lookup rules, error messages, theming and all that. See, JavaScript is all vertically, horizontally listed at the top of the form, and your fields are slightly different as well. So it looks different. You should notice a difference because that's in there. However, for modern designs, we would see it laid out this way. Okay, those details, that detail pane, I'm sliding open for and closed. There's a little triangle over there on the top right there. It allows us to change that up. All right, now you're looking right at it and thinking, Kyle, get to that Google Translate and custom translation option thing. So I'm going to come to that in a moment. Let's start off with the simple, older way of doing things with Google Translate. A lot of us will find this very easy to implement. It's because we're using the classic design and we don't have any need for modern design. So we've started out this way, or we have an older version of Laserfiche Forms, maybe version 10, maybe version 11 without any updates. Maybe you have update 1 or 2, right? So you would see a form that kind of looks like this. And I've called it Google Translate Basic Implementation. And this form, for example, we could theme it with our own logo, save those settings, and implement our Google Translate in there. Now you're going to wonder, how did we get there? So I'm going to go to Layout. And the way we do this is fairly straightforward. We have our page layout. We have our default page title here. And then you can't see it. And notice there's a field here called submission date, but in between there, there's another field. Let's go ahead and click on that and edit that field. What is it? It's actually, if we notice the fields choices here on the designer, custom HTML. Click and drag that field onto this form, and you're going to drop in a bit of HTML. All right, so it's going to have a div and an ID that says Google_translate_element. A div is just a section or a little kind of cell, if you will. It would look like a cell in Excel if it were, but it's a div. And that refers to some of the HTML, the JavaScript that's been added to this form as well. Okay, so you're going to start with that particular custom HTML with that reference. And that's all you need on the form itself. We then want to go to our JavaScript and CSS area. We'll go to JavaScript, click on that. And we then want to add a little bit of code. And we can get a copy of this. It's on the internet. If you need a copy, we'll include that as part of the recording and get that in there, but it's easily found. You can even find it on Laserfiche's support site or Laserfiche's answers forum. So you'll have this code. And it just implements some scripting. It uses that JavaScript and points to that item that we added as our custom HTML. And what you can do is, notice here's that actual, the reference that we saw earlier. Whoops, disappeared there. And we can even include other languages choices. So as you can see, this has quite a few different other languages. You can go look on Google and find out what the additional languages are available. But the default is, in this case, English, and then included are any others. So if you wanted to, if you didn't have French in there, for example, take that out, and you wanted to add French as a supported language, just add the code for that language and put a comma there, no space. Okay, so now you've added all these other languages. Okay, so this code is in there. It's not going to change. It's not going to translate dates or a particular title wrap item in the form. But this is easy code. You can find it. You might even actually be able to find it under Learn More, although I can't guarantee that. All right, so a bit of simple JavaScript. You'll save that when you drop it in and customize it with the included languages. Go ahead and hit save with any changes. And then, assuming everything's good to go, you'll go ahead and hit the preview button. Notice I have to save it first, okay? So go ahead and save that. That's all good. I'll close those. And now we'll preview what might have been in a simple form. So here we go. English is our default, but remember we had those choices in that list. So as we can see, we have what were listed in those items. So if you wanted to see this page in French, it does this. Now it changes the form itself, but notice on the item above, it also changed the tab. So it's actually changing your browser as well. It's not just the form. So this is kind of interesting. All right, keep that in mind for our implementation in the advanced method. All right, so now we could go back to our previous to show original or translate. So an easy implementation in the form itself. Really cool. Okay. So to recap, that was our classic designer mode with a bit of small, short CSS, as we can see here. And then in the layout of the form itself, you'll have a custom HTML item. And you don't actually add any content here. You just have a reference to the, as this is the area where the translate icon occurs. So there's that element. And we saw that in the JavaScript with the element name. If we scroll across, there's that element name. So that's the function that is referencing that area. And there you go. Very simple to implement on older versions of the classic designer, classic design form. If you're using any forms that use the modern, we're going to have to do it a different way because Laserfiche has changed the way the JavaScript runs. It runs in a sandbox in the iframe and only implements a particular set of JavaScript, mostly for forms. And this is the next part of our demonstration. We'll cover how we implement using that new form designer. How do we know what that looks like? Anytime you create a new form, you'll get the choice. If you have a newer version of Laserfiche Forms 11, newer than version update 3, I think. Or actually version 11 actually has a new designer. So classic design, you could use that simple method for items. For the new form designer, or what they just call the default form designer, we do have to implement things a bit differently with JavaScript. And this is where this sample comes into play. So they'll give you a two forms in the item. I've added a third to show the classic, but that wasn't in the actual uploaded content from Laserfiche. That's for this demonstration. But the modern designer and no translations will occur. So you'll want to use no translations first. So just drop into that form design. You'll see it has a few items in here. I've customized the logo and the form title, but you'll notice it has a language selector here. It also has a Google Translate button and a custom translation button. Remember I mentioned that there was that optional Google Translate API from Cloud? So you'll have a Google Cloud account, and that Cloud account number is your API account number, basically. And if you want the Google Translate button here that we see to work and translate the fields on this form and give you the code that we need, then that'll work. If you don't have that, it's going to be a bit of a customization step. So that's why they call it custom translation. All right, so this form has two languages. All right, so here's where we go. And I don't have a Google Translate API code, otherwise I would use that. So let's go ahead and see how this works. So you've got your form. Before you begin doing this translate, build your form, okay? The classic design, that Google Translate button doesn't care. You can update the form anytime, it still works. Every field will get translated, but it's translating the entire page. Whereas in this new method, we are translating just the page itself, nothing extraneous. In fact, you'll see how specific it is in a moment. So you'll have to have your languages set up. If you want multiple languages and you're going to use the Google API to get some translations, make sure you have your selected languages set up. And how do we do that? All right, so there's a specific method that you're going to use. So your language selector, if you go in and look at the properties, on that. We're going to open the details. And down on the bottom right corner, we can see those two choices. We can see English and Spanish, and you're going to want to give them each a value. In many ways, you're going to use the same codes that Google Translate uses. So lowercase 2-letter codes are pretty common, except for some of the others, which you can find very easily by searching the internet. EN, ES, add another choice if you need another one, maybe French, and you'll put FR, whatever you need to add. You'll add them here along with its associated value. So if one were to add French, make sure your value is FR in that field. Whoop, don't need that. All right, save those in your form. Okay, I'm going to skip that. I don't want to save that, so we'll just revert. And there we go. So now we have two. At this point, with that saved, you can simply go to the preview and make sure, like I was mentioning before, make sure you have most of your, or if not all of your form design in place. Now with Google Translate and the API code and that method, this becomes rather easy. If you make updates, you can come back and then do a translate and it'll update. Now this is going to be hidden normally in production, but for testing and just getting things up and running, this is going to be visible, and then you're going to let it run. You'll in production, you'll set a hide rule to hide this custom code. In fact, if we look at it, we highlight that particular item. It's got some custom code, and it has a few sections here. It's got two buttons, and we've got a div that holds the two buttons, right? So a div is just a cell if you were in a table, right? So two different buttons on here. This is built into the sample. So I didn't build this. In fact, I'm really not even a coder. I don't do development. I can read it, but I can't do it myself. So I'm relying upon what I'm finding here to do my work. And you should be able to do this too. It's really straightforward. Just don't change things that you don't know what they are. So this is a really great tool. And this is dropped in here on the first part. Now there's some underlying code elsewhere that we're going to see in a moment, but this is already preset for us. So let's go ahead and hit the preview button. This is going to help us to grab that code. All right, so here we go. So assuming you've got your form all designed, you haven't hidden, not yet at least, you have not hidden the custom coding buttons here. Because I don't have the Google API in my system, my Google Translate button is grayed out. It would work if I did have one and it was in place. Now, all these fields on all these tabs, we want to translate. The one thing I found, and they'll tell you, is that this in here, in the upload box, the name of the upload box will change, but the text inside of this box where it says drag and drop, that will not change. It'll always say that in English, although the button itself will change. So as we can see, we don't have any translations found. In fact, if we had the API enabled, we would actually get some automatic translations provided to us. So in our case, we're going to just use custom translation. Go ahead and hit that button, and we now get the translations. The translations themselves, actually, the first time you run it, you'll need to run a different item. And I'm going to go ahead and do that. I have another process which could show how you can do that. We'll come back to that in a moment. I want to get that up before we show it on screen. But back on our preview here, we're typically going to press and we're in preview mode. And you'll know if you have update 5 because you'll see this preview configuration box up the top. This is on version 11, update 5. Update 4 and previous will not have this at the top. So you'll know if you have update 5 because you'll see this in preview mode. Otherwise, you won't see it. So we got this error message saying there's no translations found because we don't have an API. In fact, let's show you why. If we go look at our JavaScript, we go look at the JavaScript here. There is a number and a whole host of coding in here. So there's a lot, right? And if you scroll down through this, there's a section in here where you can enter your, and I think it's towards the bottom here. Actually, just after our field coding. All right, in fact, they give you a nice little item that says, do not modify the code unless you know what you're doing down below. All right, so up above, we can do things. So for example, here's this construction called the translate API key. And inside those quotes, you will actually put your Google Cloud API account number. It's not really just for translate, but they kind of say it. So that number, if that's in there and it's connected to the field ID of that Google Translate button, that'll do that. So in fact, you won't need this after you've generated the text in production, right? So you can disable all this by remarking it out. How do you remark out code? Put the 2 slashes in there, and that remarks out a single line of code. But that's where we're pointing if we had it. I don't have one, so we won't see that, all right? So in our, and this is field 1 from JavaScript. All right, so we'll go there. And that's really field 1, or actually, well, it helps if you actually highlight the JavaScript. There we go. Yeah, field 1 is right there. That's that code. All right, so in preview mode, we have these fields in English, right? So our English choice. So if we click on custom translation, it's going to pop up with a screen. In fact, before it gets to this screen, I've already run it once, and that's why we're getting dropped right in here. There's a button in green that will say download the translation. And as we can see, and then also you'll get a checkbox towards the top that says pretty print. Yeah, pretty-print. And it's a little checkbox. And it converts the text, which was all kind of word wrapped together, into this format that we see here. So we see our English format, we see our form, our title, and description, and any labeling of our action buttons. So for English, we'll leave forms in place, and then we'll highlight and change any of these other items. So if it's not English, let's scroll down. We scroll down, yes, we do. So there was 2 options in our list, right? Remember, English and Spanish. Here's the ES version. And it actually kind of took the same formatting, but we would fill in the Spanish for this. In fact, I just went to the Google Translate webpage and dropped this English in, and then cut and pasted the Spanish translation into each one of these areas. Okay, so for each field, you'll have items. Now, the field names themselves, like 0-basic information page, you don't need to translate that, but the label, you'll change that. The next button, you'll translate that. So here we have these different parts on the form. All right. So the action buttons, you'll translate the action buttons, submit, approve, whatever is on that form, save as draft. That should all be now in this language. In this case, Spanish, or any other languages that you choose to implement. So how did we do that? Well, here's how it works out. We're going to go back to our design. I'm going to show you the way we did it in the modern designer with all that implemented. All right, just a preview to see how we got there and see where we're going. We'll preview that, and we now have, notice the tab up at the top says preview. If we change it to Spanish, the tab didn't change, but the form itself changed. And I've implemented 3 different languages aside from English. It changes the field labels, it changed the buttons, it changes the tabs, changes the column headers and the column row labeling. The add button is changed. The search button, it didn't change, but the forward and back buttons to the previous tabs are available there. The submit button has been changed. The signing button has changed. The upload button, and unfortunately only the English here in the upload area is remaining. All right, and then the default date and time will be captured, is saved there, but the label is in there. Okay, so how did we get this to really drop in? So that's pretty neat, right? Choosing a different language switches it up. Awesome. And you can support as many languages as you really need. How did we get there, though? So you've also hidden this form. Remember that Google Translate and custom translation buttons, that wasn't even visible on the form, right? Nowhere to be found on the form. So one, you're going to build a field rule, and you're going to hide that field 1 with that whole div section. Just hide always, and that would be in production. Before you go into production, you can leave it unhidden or just show it. In fact, it's in here as a field rule out of the box, so you don't have to add this field rule. It should already be here. But it's pretty simple to add if you didn't find it, so it's just in that, it's listed there, and you can show or hide it. Show it before you make it live, and then hide it when you make it go live for production. All right, and then if we go back to our layout in Modern Designer, we're going to go up to the top, and the code that you found in that pop-up, right? Remember you had said, hey, you know what, I'm going to get the, it's kind of funny there, that's there, but this is just it's just going to try and connect to Google Translate, and it won't ever come back. So that's the problem with that one. The code that we got back, right? So we got that EN section with all of its translations and the Spanish section. I'm going to show you what that looks like, and you'll do that for any other language as well, plus some other items. So if we go to our form and then go to our JS item, we will have copied what we had from the code, right? That whole string. And all we have to do is go to the JS button there, and you'll drop in, you'll already see some information up at the top. It's all kind of commented out here, these items here. In fact, there's a way to comment out several lines at once. It says / asterisk, and then asterisk / ends the multi-line item. Ignore these asterisks in between. That's just kind of for identification. But as you can see, we now have our translations, and you really just only have to be aware of the starting point, which is the double quotes and the language code, and then all the rest of the code. Okay, so you'll drop that in this space before you get to other ones. Oh, by the way, let's scroll down here. We have different tabs, labels, and then, by the way, for address fields, you can actually change the code on the subfields on the address field, right? So your language would change. So let's scroll through this. This is our English translation, which is in here, but it has to be in here. You can't get away with not having it in here. Let's put it that way. And then at the bottom, before you get to the next language, be aware this is important. The ending point, they all kind of have a curly braces end point, and then before the next item is a curly braces comma encapsulating this first grouping of language. And then you'll start with that. So there's only two. There's a curly brace 1 at the end and a curly brace with a comma at this point. And then we get into our next language. So this is going to follow the same format. And as we scroll down here, we can see that our language has been converted. So again, for each one, basically what did I do? I went to Google Translate and I dropped in the English version and copied out the Spanish version and replaced it right here for the label, the previous button, and the next button language. And I did that for every single piece of this. Subtext and tooltips, if you want to, you can do that if that field actually has text below or tooltips, you can add that language in there in that. So this is fairly standardized for each field. The address field is the field itself right there, but then the subfields are in here. You don't need to change the show option. It just should say true. The label, you're not going to change the label, but you are going to change the name of the label. All right. So that's for that language. Scrolling down, still the same number of fields for this form. So everything should look the same as far as the number count. You should always get down. And in this case, it has 12 fields, I guess. And then we go, and then we have our curly brace, comma, and then our next language. And you'll have pasted in that information as well. See how tedious this is? So if you have a Google API, you can do the Google Translate and it'll actually get all that code and do it for you and put the words in that area so that you don't have to go in and do the translations for each one of those pieces of information. So it just does all that work for you. That's the real advantage to it, but you don't need it in order to do this. It just takes a little bit of time, okay? So I have 4 languages, English, Spanish, French, and Russian. And as you can see, the lining, the lines get long. We're down to 300 lines, etc. Okay. And then my last one is Russian. And so there they all are. And then at the end of this one, so at the very end of any of those languages, it's actually going to be 3 curly braces, not 2, before you get to this other code and whatnot. All right. So you'll see that code in there. And then you'll have 3 curly braces that are indented slightly, and they are coming back out. And then you'll end not with a comma, but with a semicolon. All right. And then that's it. That's all you need to edit in there. So there's your JavaScript for all the languages. Save that. And now you can test it. Go ahead and preview that and just make sure that it does that. Now I had a trouble when it was trying to translate where it wouldn't change. I could choose any one of these, but it wasn't changing. And the trick was, as I mentioned, I'll mention it again, in your JavaScript, you want to make sure that, let's make sure that we're a little bit delayed here. Oh, come on. Go all the way to the top. All right, so you've got your first language. We'll come down where our next language starts and make sure that it has that. Now, at one point, I actually didn't have an action buttons portion to my form. All right, it had a title, description, but it was missing some coding. It had a comma instead of, or it didn't have a comma, and it didn't have an action buttons. Somehow I had messed up my pasting, and it didn't have this curly brace or the action buttons area. And that caused it to break as well. So it's going to be consistent. It'll have form, title, description, action buttons, and then it gets into the fields, right? So, and then again, at the end of the next fields or section for the language, you'll come down and it will have 2 curly braces and then your next language section. And then at the end of the language section, it's going to be 3 curly braces and not a comma, but a semicolon, okay? Implement all that and you should then see in your preview, everything works beautifully. All right, very cool. All right, I know that was sounded a lot of complex things. It's pretty straightforward, I think, in most cases. And Laserfiche Answers is a great place to find some solutions. In fact, this solution was discussed, and there's a couple posts in Laserfiche Answers about this. So if you have questions, they have links and some videos from other implementers of Laserfiche as well. But hopefully this one finds you using this rather simply and easily as far as implementing translations in Laserfiche Forms. And as we saw, both in a basic classic design or the modern form designer in the newer versions of Laserfiche Forms. All right, and that concludes our demo here today. I didn't see any questions or chats, so hopefully that made a lot of sense. For the video that will be up in a few days, go ahead and find that on our Cities Digital YouTube channel. You can search for Cities Digital or just use that link. Answers forum is Laserfiche's answers.laserfiche.com site. For uploadable content or downloadable content, they have a solutions exchange where you can find some of these other solutions, not just translations, but in your form system itself, you will find that. And if you have questions and want to visit Laserfiche's support site, that's found at laserfiche.com/support or support.laserfiche.com. Thanks again, everyone, for attending our Laserfiche Forms Love Languages webinar. My name is Kyle from Cities Digital. From all of us here at Cities Digital, we thank you for your attendance and we open it up to questions.